Welcome back, focus learners. Let's dive right into today's explainer, where we're exploring a seriously fascinating, totally unapologetic look at the pure mechanics of power and influence. We're drawing from some incredible historical source material to examine exactly how power has been wielded across the centuries. We're taking a very objective, almost anthropological approach today to really understand the hidden and, let's be honest, sometimes ruthless dynamics that have shaped entire empires, destroyed kings, and built modern fortunes. Right off the bat, this material challenges everything we thought we knew. I mean, is honesty really the best policy, or is it more of a blunt instrument? We've all been taught since we were kids that honesty is always the way to go. But when you look at the historical game of power, unfettered honesty is often seen as a blunt instrument that just bloodies more than it cuts. By constantly blurting out every single intention, you make yourself entirely predictable. So throughout this explainer, we're going to look at how history's most successful strategists actually laid pure honesty aside in favor of highly calculated appearances. Now, if you know the source text, you know there are nearly 50 individual laws in there. But don't worry, we're not going to grind through a massive 20-item listicle today. Instead, we've synthesized the first 20 laws into a cohesive roadmap. Number 1, mastering perception. Number 2, navigating friends and enemies. Number 3, strategic leverage. And number 4, the power of unpredictability. All right, starting with pillar number 1, mastering the art of perception and controlling the narrative. This first pillar focuses entirely on the outer layer of power. It's all about how you are perceived by those around you and how controlling that narrative gives you an immediate upper hand. See, powerful figures throughout history manipulated their outward image by doing a few key things. They concealed their true intentions, usually behind smokescreens. They said way less than necessary, which made the words they did say carry immense weight. They guarded their reputations literally with their lives, knowing that in the social realm, appearances are everything. And above all, they courted attention at all costs, because being ignored is pretty much the worst fate for anyone seeking influence. Actually, there's a perfect example of the power of saying less. I shall see. That's it. That is the incredibly brief, enigmatic phrase used by King Louis XIV of France. When his ministers would come to him sweating, presenting these complex arguments and proposals, Louis would just listen in dead silence, look them in the eye, say, I shall see, and then literally just walk away. This self-imposed silence kept everyone below him completely off balance. By carefully controlling what he revealed, he terrified his courtiers. They would nervously jump in to fill the silence and inadvertently reveal their own weaknesses. Another absolutely crucial aspect of perception is winning through your actions, not your words. Take the incredible micro-story of Michelangelo and his famous statue of David. The city's mayor, Piero Soderini, looked at this magnificent masterpiece and actually complained that the nose was too big. Now, instead of arguing with a very powerful patron, Michelangelo took action. He climbed up the scaffolding, secretly scooped up a handful of marble dust, and just tapped his chisel lightly, without actually cutting any stone, letting that hidden dust fall to the ground. He literally changed the patron's perspective, and what do you know? Soderini agreed the nose was now perfect. Michelangelo proved his point and protected his work without uttering a single argumentative word. To maintain that kind of perceptual control, historical figures loved using what's called a smokescreen, basically a familiar, inconspicuous front used to distract a mark from your real intentions. The source material highlights this brilliant con artist known as the Yellow Kid. This guy staged an incredibly elaborate fake boxing match, complete with a boxer appearing to literally die from a horrific punch. It was a total smokescreen to distract a wealthy mark named Sam Giesel. Giesel was so panicked by this fake tragedy that he just bolted, completely forgetting the 35 grand he had just handed over. The familiar distraction flawlessly hid the true intention. Moving on to pillar number 2, navigating friends and enemies. Who to trust and who to crush. This section dives into some deeply counterintuitive interpersonal dynamics. It really asks us to reevaluate exactly who we trust. Look, conventional wisdom says you should hire your friends, right? Well, the text argues that friends are actually easily aroused to envy, and the act of hiring them often feels condescending, which leads them to become spoiled and resentful. On the flip side, bringing a former enemy into your service, they have way more to prove. They'll often work harder and become fiercely loyal, simply out of gratitude for that second chance. To ground this in some harsh historical reality, just look at Emperor Michael III of the Byzantine Empire. He raised his absolute best buddy, Basilius, all the way from a peasant stable boy to his chief counselor, showered him with wealth, gave him tons of power,
And how did Basilius repay this incredible friendship? By becoming deeply entitled, demanding more power, and eventually having Emperor Michael assassinated so he could take the throne for himself. Yeah, Michael's misplaced trust in a friend ended with his head on a pike. So, conversely, how do you handle actual enemies? Well, the source text lays out a pretty brutal, objective law of historical survival. Crush your enemy totally. As the quote goes, if one ember is left alight, a fire will eventually break out. Think about Chinese General Liu Bang's relentless pursuit of his rival Shang Yu. The lesson here is that when you stop halfway out of mercy, you're really just nursing a bitter, resentful viper who's going to bide their time and inevitably seek revenge. In the historical game of power, survival very often meant total victory. Now, to protect your autonomy while dealing with people, you've got to remember 3 key rules. First, avoid the incurably unhappy and unlucky. Misery is literally an infectious disease. Hang around chronically destructive people, and you will inevitably draw their misfortune right onto yourself. Second, do not commit to anyone. Just like Queen Elizabeth I, who maintained immense power by never committing to a single suitor, you keep your independence and make them court you. And third, make other people come to you. You maintain total control and leverage when you are the bait, forcing your opponents to abandon their plans just to react to yours. That brings us to pillar number 3, strategic leverage and manipulation. This is all about getting exactly what you want. To really grasp the calculated mechanics of leverage, dependency, and human psychology, let's look at this exact number, $50,000. That is the precise amount of money that a legendary con artist named Count Victor Lustig managed to borrow from Al Capone. Yes, the most ruthless, cynical gangster in American history. Lustig promised to double Capone's money, but instead, he literally just locked it away in a safety deposit box for 2 straight months. Then, 2 months later, Lustig goes back, returns the exact 50 grand to Capone, and apologizes profusely, saying his scheme failed. Now Capone, a guy who spent his whole life surrounded by absolute wolves, fully expecting to be cheated, was completely stunned. What Lustig did here was employ selective honesty. It's a calculated, deeply sincere move designed to completely disarm a cynical target. Capone was so incredibly touched by this rare display of honesty that he just handed Lustig $5,000 as a reward, which ironically was exactly what Lustig was conning him for all along. That single honest gesture covered dozens of dishonest ones. To see how this psychology translates to broader persuasion, let's travel back to the era right before the Peloponnesian War. The golden rule here: when you need help, never appeal to mercy or gratitude. Appeal to self-interest. Corcyra went to Athens and offered a pragmatic, mutual naval alliance. Corinth, on the other hand, went to Athens and begged for help based on past favors and gratitude. The result? Athens acted logically in their own self-interest and allied with Corcyra. The takeaway is super clear. People are pragmatic. You only gain leverage when you show them exactly what they stand to gain. Leverage also heavily relies on dependency. History shows us that Otto von Bismarck secured his ultimate power not by trying to be a fiercely independent lone wolf, but by actually aligning himself with a very weak Prussian king. Bismarck intentionally made the king completely reliant on his intelligence and strong-arm tactics just to survive. The crucial point here is that ultimate power isn't necessarily about isolating yourself. It's about embedding yourself so deeply into the system of a weak master that they absolutely require your iron and blood to function. All right, moving to our final pillar, number 4, the power of unpredictability and psychological warfare. This section examines how breaking your own patterns and keeping opponents in suspense can become your ultimate weapon. Take a look at the legendary 1972 World Chess Championship between Bobby Fischer and Boris Spassky. Spassky was incredibly famous for predicting his opponent's moves. So, what did Fischer do? He literally unhinged the guy by being utterly unpredictable. Check out this timeline. He refuses to arrive on time, then shows up just 1 minute before the match is permanently canceled. He makes a terrible, totally uncharacteristic blunder in Game 1. He straight up forfeits Game 2 by not showing up at all. By Game 3 onward, he is playing entirely unorthodox moves. Spassky had a complete psychological meltdown. The guy actually started accusing Fischer of drugging his orange juice or putting mind-altering chemicals in the chairs. Fischer won simply by scrambling his patterns. Connecting this historical chess match directly back to our everyday lives, humans are creatures of habit. We naturally fall into these observable routines because, frankly, it's comfortable. But in the realm of influence and strategy,
That predictability is a massive vulnerability. It gives your opponents, your colleagues, or your competitors a false sense of control over you. They think they know exactly how to read you and, more dangerously, how to provoke you. So, how do we counter this vulnerability? First, deliberately scramble your patterns. Do it just to stimulate interest and keep people completely off balance. Second, use absence to increase your value. Think about it. Just like economic scarcity drives up the price of goods, temporarily withdrawing your presence makes you more talked about and highly respected. And finally, avoid building fortresses. When we feel threatened, our first instinct is usually to hide and isolate ourselves. But isolation cuts you off from valuable information, and it actually makes you a highly visible sitting duck. Mingle, circulate, and stay fluid. And that brings us to the end of today's explainer. I want to leave you with this final thought-provoking question. As we've seen through all these historical examples, power is rarely an accident. It requires actively managing perception, deeply understanding human nature, and strictly controlling your own predictability. Knowing all these historical laws, will you use this awareness to become the absolute master of your circumstances? Or will you remain blissfully unaware and inevitably become a victim of someone else's strategy? Think about it. Keep learning, stay focused, and I'll catch you in the next one.